Deep dives and blue skies. Welcome back to Talking Blue with Nick, the best Dodgers analytical podcast that you can find. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Talking Blue, the best Dodgers analytical podcast that you can find. I am your host, Nick. Today you are listening to episode 71 of Talking Blue. It is a special one. It is the biggest one because today we are previewing the World Series between your Los Angeles Dodgers and the Toronto Blue Jays. That's right. We now know who the Dodgers will be playing. It is the Blue Jays. Dodgers, Blue Jays, LA versus Toronto. Unbelievable. And I can't wait to break it all down with you guys. So before we get into it, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on all social media at Talking Blue Pod. You can follow myself at Talking Blue Nick on X. I'm going to be live tweeting throughout the World Series, posting breakdowns, posting videos, all that kind of stuff. And then on Reddit as well at competitive-week8715. So if you're new to these preview videos, I do it all throughout the regular season. Breakdown and preview series, not every single series throughout the regular season. I wasn't able to always do them, but I preview a lot of the series. I did preview the Blue Jays back in August when these two teams played, and I have been previewing each postseason series. I previewed the NLCS, gave you my thoughts. So if you're new to this, like I said, I'm going to give you guys a lot of info on the Blue Jays. If you don't know, I'm going to tell you about their lineup, their pitching staff, just their team overall, who's their good players, who's their not so good players. How do the two teams match up? My thoughts, all that kind of stuff, and kind of like how can the Dodgers, get to victory, get to their second World Series championship in a row, all that stuff. Before we get into all that, pretty much the entire breakdown, I was just thinking to myself before recording, isn't this crazy that here we are again? It's the World Series. Like, this is what you play for. This is what, as a fan, this is what you watch. This is what you hopefully get to see is your team play in the World Series. It's so cool for me. I've seen the Dodgers play in a lot of World Series, now 5 in the last 9 years, and I've seen them in the playoffs 13 years in a row. And this is obviously my first year doing a podcast of my own, and here we are, first year on the pod, back in the World Series. And I just thought it was cool. Like, I get to do these preview videos, and now I'm previewing the World Series, like the biggest series, the biggest games of the year in this sport, in our sport. So thought that was pretty sick. Quickly, my thoughts on the Blue Jays. They're a really good team. They obviously won the American League East. They had the best record in the American League. I believe they were tied with the same record for the Yankees, but they held the tiebreaker, so that gave them the best record in the 1 seed. They took out the Yankees pretty easily in 4 games. Then they just had an epic series with the Seattle Mariners. Poor Mariners fans. They lose Game 7. The Mariners are still the only franchise in all of Major League Baseball to never appear in a World Series, let alone win a World Series. They've never been to a World Series. It was really back-and-forth series. The Blue Jays fell down 0-2, came back to tie the series, but then they lost Game 5, went back to Toronto, down 3-2, then won both games. They even won Game 7 in comeback fashions. That's a lot of what this team is made up of, a lot of comebacks. They had the most comeback wins in Major League Baseball this year. Second was the Dodgers. So they are the 2 best comeback teams in baseball. The Blue Jays are first, and they've done that all postseason. If you guys listened to my previous preview, which was about the Brewers, I talked about how the Brewers didn't hit a ton of home runs. They made contact, kind of like what their team was made up of. There actually is a lot of similarities between this team, the Blue Jays, and the Brewers. Not completely. I think the Blue Jays are a little bit of a better team, and I don't think that's just recency bias. I think that they have a little bit more pop to their lineup. But a couple more nice things before we get to the preview. The Blue Jays are actually a team that I've liked watching throughout the years. If my dad hears this, he'll hate hearing this because he's a Yankees fan and he doesn't like the Blue Jays. But I've actually liked a lot of their players. Vladimir Guerrero is one of my favorite non-Dodger players in the game right now. I liked him when he was younger. People forget because of recency bias, but how hyped up he was as a young prospect. He was the number one prospect in baseball for a few years, as when he was like 16, 17, 18 years old. And he had one of the highest hit tools from like scouts. When you have prospects, they give out grades. I think it's from like a 20 to 80 scale. He was one of the only like 80 hit tools graded out hitting prospects. They have a lot of other good players. Bo Bichette, I've always liked him. And, you know, I don't really love George Springer because he was a Houston Astro, but before the cheating days, I actually did used to like George Springer. And a couple other their players, you know, and some of their pitchers. So I've kind of always liked the Blue Jays. And actually before, in the past, when I've thought about teams the Dodgers could go up against in the World Series, I've thought about the Blue Jays before. So pretty cool stuff. I actually like the Blue Jays, but not this week. I'm not going to like them. I'm going to hope the Dodgers take them out. So let's get to the actual preview. Let me give you guys some info on the Blue Jays, what makes them very good, what makes them not so good, and all that stuff. So offensively, the Blue Jays were first in batting average, first in on-base percentage, seventh in slugging percentage. And that gives them an OPS that was third in all of Major League Baseball. So one of the better offensives, if not the best offense in the game this year. They are the best contact team in the game. They had the lowest whiff percentage overall, the lowest swing and miss rate, and they had the lowest K percentage. So they don't strike out and they don't whiff. They put the ball in play. They were 13th in Major League Baseball in home runs and walks, and they had the 7th highest chase percentage as a lineup. I talked to you guys before about the Brewers. They were a team that didn't hit a lot of home runs, but they put the ball in play, didn't strike out. Some similarities with the Blue Jays. Like I said, they are first in batting average, first in on base, but seventh in slug, which is still good. They do have guys that slug, but still not as high as some of the other teams like the Yankees, like the Dodgers, teams like that. But they still have a high OPS. Now, like I said, the number one contact team in the game, so they don't strike out and they don't swing and miss a lot. So that is what makes them very similar to the Brewers. We saw how that worked out for the Brewers in that series. 13th in home runs, so they don't hit a ton of home runs. Now in the postseason, they have hit a good amount of home runs. Guys like Vladimir Guerrero, they have some other guys, Addison Barger, George Springer. They do have guys with some pop, but a lot of their lineup is kind of based around, you know, the guys at the bottom of the order who kind of set up things for the big sluggers that they do have at the top of the order. Again, I'm going to get to their players and their lineup and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, they are a team that doesn't strike out, but they do have some pop. But the one kind of difference from them and the Brewers is that the Brewers did walk a lot and were the best team at not chasing out of the strike zone. The Blue Jays are not that. They do chase a little bit, a lot more than the Brewers did, and they don't walk as much. They're kind of just middle of the pack when it comes to walking. Now, on the pitching side, this is where I think the Dodgers are kind of a lot better than the Blue Jays. On the pitching side, their team ERA was 4.19, which was 19th in all of Major League Baseball. They allowed the 6th most home runs, and they actually allowed the highest barrel percentage in baseball. Those were two things I dug into that I didn't know. 6th most home runs allowed, and the number one barrel percentage. So they allowed a lot of hard hit balls, a lot of barrels. Starting pitching ERA, they were 20th in all of Major League Baseball. So top 10 worst, basically, is the way to look at that. And then relief pitcher ERA, they were 16th. So I know that there might be some Blue Jay fans who see this, or even Dodger fans who see both teams' ERAs. The Dodgers were, I think, 16th in baseball, and the Blue Jays, like I said, are 19th. That's because the Dodgers had a very bad bullpen, which the Blue Jays also had a bad bullpen. But in terms of starting pitching ERA, the Dodgers were 5th in all of Major League Baseball, and like I said, the Blue Jays are 20th. So the Dodgers had elite starting pitching, and it's gotten even better in the postseason. The Blue Jays had really bad starting pitching, and they also had pretty bad bullpen pitching. So they're kind of somewhat similar teams in terms of, like, they have very good offense. They don't really have great bullpens, but the difference is that the Dodgers have the best pitching in the game, and the Blue Jays do not. So a couple other little things. Bo Bichette, who has not played all postseason, he's dealt with a knee injury, looks like he's going to be back in the World Series. He's going to be on the roster. At least that's what he said so far. Tanner Scott, we know that he was taken off the NLDS roster against the Phillies, which means he wasn't eligible for the NLCS. He is an option to be back on the World Series roster. If it was up to me, I would not have him on. He had a really bad regular season. We've gotten this far without him. I don't even think Dave Roberts should be given the chance to put him into games. I think they should just say, hey, Tanner, take the rest of this month off and enjoy your offseason early and get ready for 2026. But we'll see if he's on there. I also think they don't need him because they kind of have a lot of lefties in the bullpen, so I think that's another reason. And then Anthony Santander, who is outfielder, DH, big free agent that the Blue Jays signed last offseason from the Orioles. He got injured in the ALCS, which meant he is ineligible for the World Series roster, so he will not be on the roster. So, let me give you my thoughts on the Blue Jays quickly. What they are not so good at and what they are good at. First is what I'm gonna start off what they're really good at and what kind of makes them scary. So, the Blue Jays, very, very good offense. Probably the best offensive team in the postseason this far. Obviously, the postseason is much more limited sample size, and teams that get to the World Series, it would make sense that you probably were the best offensive team. But they as a whole have been the best offense because they have been not striking out, putting the ball in play a lot, and then they also have brought a little bit more slug. So I told you guys in that Brewers series, I talked about the whole kind of dynamic or kind of like old school, new school argument. We all know that current Major League Baseball, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of home runs. And I always hear on TV, I kind of see a lot of old school people's, I don't want to call out people, but I always see Alex Rodriguez, who works for Fox, other guys who like to say, well, home runs and, that slug approach doesn't work in the postseason. You need to put the ball in play. You need to do this. You need to get on base. And, of course, if you're striking out a lot, you're not going to win anything in the postseason. But the way to win postseason games is to hit home runs, because hitting home runs is the fastest way to change a game, and it's also the easiest way because you're not stringing rallies together against elite teams. And I told you guys before the Brewers series, you can go back and watch it before any of that game, any of that series was played. I said to you, it wasn't necessarily a prediction, but what I thought was going to play out was that the Brewers were not going to be able to play the way they played in the regular season against the Dodgers because the elite starting pitching of the Dodgers was going to suffocate that lineup, was going to, the Brewers were not going to be able to string rallies together, string hits together against the Dodgers against the Dodgers pitching, and they weren't going to be leaving the yard that much because they don't do that, and ultimately the Dodgers were just going to shut them down and win games. That's exactly what happened, and it was even more, it was an even higher effect than I thought it would be, because they absolutely mowed down the Brewers. Now, I don't think that will necessarily be the case with the Blue Jays, but I just wanted to say that. Now, what makes I've seen a lot of Dodger fans, whenever you're seeing things in the postseason, and I think that everyone becomes naturally scared of what could be. So the Dodgers, we know, have been winning postseason games and series based on their elite starting pitching. The offense hasn't been bad, but it hasn't necessarily been what we know it could be. The Blue Jays have been winning because of their elite offense. So I've seen a lot of Dodger fans who are a little scared and kind of created this narrative the Blue Jays are this team that rakes offensively and then the Dodgers haven't done anything. That's not necessarily the case. And I believe that this series is going to be the best series we have seen from the Dodgers offensively. The Blue Jays in their lineup. Obviously, the guys to worry about, to focus on, are Vladimir Guerrero and George Springer. So when you look at their lineup, now again, we'll see if Bo Bichette is in there, but they have George Springer hitting leadoff. I think he's third all time in postseason home runs, so he is an insane postseason hitter, one of the better postseason hitters of all time, kind of like Kike Hernandez or guys like that. George Springer is definitely up there. Now, he doesn't play the outfield anymore, and he's even been banged up this postseason because he got hit on the knee in one of those games in Seattle. Then, obviously, we know about Vladimir Guerrero. He has been the best hitter in the postseasons this far, and he's going to be the guy that the Dodgers, have circled on their, depth chart or whatever to not let beat them. He, like I said, he's one of my favorite hitters to watch because he has always been a guy who hits the ball really hard, puts the ball in play, doesn't strike out a ton, and, has really good power. But he also has now added more plate discipline and walking more. And I know that he didn't have a crazy power year this year, but he's one of the better hitters in the game. I've always felt that. Alejandro Kirk, their catcher. A weird catcher. If you look at him, he's kind of like a short, chubby guy, and he's one of the slower players in the game. But he actually grades out as a really good defensive catcher, especially when it comes to framing. And another guy who doesn't strike out, hits for a high batting average. He's a very good hitter. Dalton Varsho, former Diamondback center fielder for them. He's a really good player, and he's had one of his better offensive years this year, even though he's been injured a lot. But he's a really good player for them. He's usually hitting fifth. Ernie Clement, I just looked at his numbers. OPS over 1,000. That's pretty crazy. One of the better contact hitters in the game. He is kind of like the best representation of what the Blue Jays have done this postseason and what they're all about. Putting the ball in play, not striking out. And something that they have been able to do that I have said is difficult in the postseason is create those rallies. He is kind of like at the forefront of that. He's an aggressive hitter, doesn't strike out, puts the ball in play, and he's been, he has really good numbers this postseason, and he also plays really good defense at second and third base. Addison Barger, the guy who plays right field for them, left-handed hitter. He's like StatCast if it was put, if you could make it into a real-life player, because he hits the ball really hard, has elite bat speed, and he has a really good arm from the outfield. So he hits the ball hard, throws the ball hard. But he's one of the only Blue Jays that he whiffs a lot and strikes out a lot because he goes up there trying to, put the ball out of the ballpark. And then they have a couple other guys, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, utility player who right now has been playing second base for them. And then Andres Jimenez, who's normally their second baseman, has been playing short in absence of Bo Bichette. So we'll see how the Blue Jays align that. The interesting thing about Bo Bichette is that he is actually a really bad defensive shortstop. And it kind of would be weird. He's already a bad shortstop, and if he's been dealing with a knee injury, are you really going to put a guy out there who has knee issues to play defense, at shortstop in the World Series? I don't know. If he says he's good to go, then obviously they'll probably have him at short and have Jimenez play second base. But we'll see. George Springer not really being able to play the outfield does kind of affect them, because if he was able to play right field, and then you could have, Barger play left or something like that, or maybe switch those guys. And then you could have the same infield alignment, Jimenez at short, and then IKF at second. Then you could actually DH Bo Bichette, but you're obviously not taking George Springer's bat out of the lineup. And I think that he was already a really bad defensive outfielder. Now he also has a knee injury. I don't think that they're going to put him in the outfield. So I think that Bo Bichette's only option is to play shortstop, which he has throughout his whole career, or just be a bench bat. I think maybe they platoon him. Maybe there's a chance he plays shortstop in Game 1 against Blake Snell, but then against Yamamoto, he's on the bench. Again, another tough thing is that Andres Jimenez has hit really well. Again, another reason why the Blue Jays have been so good. He's at the bottom of the lineup, hitting ninth, and he's hit a couple home runs this postseason. So they have a very, very deep lineup. Like I said, they had the best average and the best on base in the game this year. George Springer had an incredible resurgent year, hit over 30 home runs. Another guy I didn't even mention, Nathan Lucas, who plays left field for them, also plays right field occasionally. One of their platoon hitters. So in Game 1 against Snell, he won't be in the starting lineup. That'll be Davis Schneider playing left field because he normally hits against lefties. And then Nathan Lucas will be in there against Yamamoto. So they are a little bit of a platoon team. Miles Straw is also another guy who might be in there for Addison Barger against Blake Snell. They are a team, again, like the Milwaukee Brewers, who get the most out of their lineup. And like I've been saying, they don't strike out and they put the ball in play. We will see if that translates. I didn't think the Brewers' style of play was going to translate against the Dodgers pitching. I'm starting to feel similar with the Blue Jays, not to that effect. I don't think the Dodgers are going to sweep the Blue Jays. I don't think they're going to necessarily dominate the Blue Jays like they did on the mound. But I wouldn't be shocked. Again, I'll get into, kind of like predictions, but I wouldn't be shocked if something similar played out where we go back to LA and one of the stories of the series is the Blue Jays haven't done what they've been doing this postseason. So very good lineup, really good lineup. It's very, very deep. Like I said, Addison Barger, who has a ton of pop, and Ernie Clement, who's been one of the best hitters in the postseason this far. Those guys are hitting 7th and 6th. So the lineup is very, very scary, no doubt about. Now, like I said, some of the Dodger fans I've seen have been kind of worried, kind of like comparing offenses. Like the Blue Jays have this scary offense, the Dodgers just have no offense. Not at all the case. And like I said, I think the Dodgers, this is going to be their best offensive showing. So let me get to the Blue Jays pitching. Like I said, I gave you a lot of their numbers. This is where the biggest mismatch of the World Series is, on the mound and really just the pitching overall. So now I know that both teams don't really have great bullpens. So if you want to call that a wash, to me that's fine. I would give the edge to the Dodgers because, again, everyone wants to talk about, the Dodgers bullpen is bad. Well, who's been closing game for the Dodgers? Probably the best relief pitcher in the postseason so far, Roki Sasaki. The Blue Jays don't have anyone like him in their pen. Okay, so in the Blue Jays pen, quickly, I'll just talk about their pen because it's not that good. Jeff Hoffman, who's been their closer, now he's looked a lot better in the postseason, but he had a really rough year. He had an ERA over 4. He was kind of like their version of Tanner Scott, a guy who came over who's had good numbers previously and struggled. He gave up a lot of home runs as well, but he did seem to find it in this postseason. He closed out the ALCS and looked really good. Sir Anthony Dominguez, another reliever they have. They kind of have a lot of right-handers that have electric stuff. Like Sir Anthony Dominguez, he throws 100. Louis Varland, he throws 100. They have a lot of guys with nasty stuff. But overall, they don't have a pen that scares me whatsoever. Even Jeff Hoffman, he doesn't scare me. I think the Dodgers can hit him. Now, again, because they have guys who throw hard, like Varland, like Dominguez, if those guys' command is on and their control, it's going to be tough to hit them because anybody who's dotting 100, dotting 99 is tough to hit. But Sir Anthony Dominguez, Yariel Rodriguez, Louis Varland, Brandon Little is one of their better lefty relievers, but he's kind of fallen down their trust tree in this postseason. Braden Fisher, Mason Fluharty, who Dodger fans will remember, he struck out Shohei in that one game that they played in August. And then Eric Lauer and Chris Bassett are both guys who are in the rotation who have kind of kicked to the pen. So the Blue Jays bullpen is very hittable, and it's why, I feel confident that the Dodgers can not only score runs against the Blue Jays, but score runs later in the game because their starters, they're not in the same situation as the Dodgers with their starters. So the Blue Jays starting pitching specifically, I don't think they have a bad rotation or anything like that, but again, nothing that really scares me. Now, a couple years ago, these would have been some much scarier names, but if we're just talking about reality and what they did this season, these Blue Jays, these starters, aren't necessarily too scary. Max Scherzer had an ERA over 5. Shane Bieber, who got traded over from the Guardians, only threw a few innings on the mound. He had an ERA in the low 3s, but, nothing scary. Trey Savage is a rookie. Now, he's been really good in the postseason, and a pitcher that a lineup hasn't seen any of, has no familiarity, can be scary because there's the effect of, the what if. You don't really know what he looks like. And he's got some funky arm delivery stuff with a super high delivery. And then Kevin Gausman had an ERA in the mid-3s as well. Again, a very good pitcher, and I think he's their best pitcher. But they don't have, out of all the teams the Dodgers have faced this postseason, this is the least scary of starting rotations. The first series, which was against the Reds, which I know it was the Reds, and they were not a very good team by postseason standards, but Hunter Green, Andrew Abbott, Nick Lodolo. I know that they didn't use a lot of Lodolo and Abbott, but still, Hunter Green, those guys are filthy. The Phillies, we all know, Christopher Sanchez, Jesus Luzardo, Ranger Suarez, Aaron Nola. pretty loaded rotation, even without Zach Wheeler. And then the Brewers, again, that rotation didn't scare me, but they did have a certified like all-star caliber ace in Freddie Peralta. The Blue Jays, yes, Gausman has been an all-star pitcher in the past, obviously Scherzer and Bieber, but they're not really those guys right now. So again, they're all very similar pitcher. They're all tall right-handed pitchers. Kind of funny. They don't necessarily scare me, and that's why I feel confident the Dodgers will be able to score runs against them. And another thing, when it comes to the Shohei Ohtani effect, they don't really have any left-handers. They have three left-handers on their depth chart. Brandon Little, Mason Fluharty, Eric Lauer. Those guys will definitely be in there to face Shohei, but later in late innings, Louis Varland, Yariel Rodriguez, Seranthony Dominguez, those are the guys that are going to be getting the high leverage innings. Like I said, those guys don't necessarily scare me, and they're not left-handed, so don't be surprised if Shohei Ohtani comes away with the World Series MVP. Let me just say that. So that's a lot of the info on the Blue Jays. Their rotation and definitely their bullpen doesn't scare me at all. I think the Dodgers were going to be able to put up some runs against them. But obviously, the scary part of the Blue Jays is their lineup. But like I said, the rotation is just not scary. And I've said to you guys, look at the Dodgers depth chart and look at their pitchers and compare them to all the other teams. Nobody has what the Dodgers have. That rotation, again, we don't know yet. The Blue Jays haven't announced their Game 1 starter. I think it's going to be a Savage, and then it'll probably be Gausman in Game 2. So Game 1 is going to be Blake Snell against Kevin Gausman. Who are you taking there? Game 2 is going to be Yoshinobu Yamamoto versus Trey Savage. Who are you taking there? I'm not saying that just automatically means the Dodgers are going to win, but again, this is why I've always thought the Dodgers had a chance to go back-to-back, get back to the World Series, win it again. Because of this rotation, every series, every game, every time someone takes the mound, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to have a pitcher better than who the Dodgers are throwing. The only chance was in the Phillies lineup, or in the Phillies series, I should say, when the Phillies would throw Christopher Sanchez, right? Christopher Sanchez in Game 1 went up against Ohtani. Ohtani only threw 50 innings, so yeah. Shohei has better stuff than Sanchez, but Sanchez is a better pitcher than him, or at least he was this year. And then in Game 4, it was Christopher Sanchez against Glasnow. Again, it's kind of hard to, Glasnow didn't throw a ton of innings, and he's injury-prone, but other than those two starts, there wasn't really a time the Dodgers faced a pitcher that was better than the guy they were throwing. And that's why, again, I just feel confident the Dodgers can and will win this series, because I don't think anybody's putting up big numbers against the Dodgers rotation. I don't think anybody's, rocking anybody. Now, sure, someone could have an off start. Yamamoto could have one of those starts where he kind of loses his command. Same thing with the Glasnow. But still, if those guys are on, I don't think anybody's hitting them. And then when it comes to the reverse of that, of the Dodgers trying to score runs, they're not going up against as scary guys. So that's really my thoughts and all that on this series. If you wanted to give me if you wanted a prediction out of me, I'd probably go Dodgers in 6. I would love to see them win it in 4 or 5, because that means the Dodgers could win at home. That would be pretty sick if we could see them close it out at home. But it's going to be a very fun series. It's another year where the Dodgers are going up against a really good team in the AL. This isn't like a Cinderella team that has gone on a run and, they're just happy to be here. No, this is a really good Blue Jays team, and I think it's going to be a really good series. There's a lot of stars. Obviously, Vladimir Guerrero. We'll see if Bo Bichette's there, but even Max Scherzer is a Hall of Famer. There's kind of a lot of cool storylines in this series. LA versus Toronto. Another thing, Teoscar Hernandez, if you guys didn't know, Teoscar Hernandez and Vladimir Guerrero, those guys are best friends, brothers. Obviously, Teo came up in the Blue Jays organization. He came up as an Astro, but spent most of his time with the Blue Jays. And both of those guys being from from the Dominican Republic. They're two really close friends. Kershaw and Scherzer, two old guys who came up in similar times, two of the best pitchers of this generation. They're going to both be on this rotation. The whole Shohei possibly going to the Blue Jays, if you don't know, 2 years ago when Shohei was a free agent, possibly coming to the Dodgers, there was this whole crazy Twitter thing about fans were tracking flights, that Shohei was going to be on a flight to Toronto, and it was looking like he was going to sign there, although that it never really was going to happen. It never did happen. So a lot of cool storylines that the Blue Jays haven't been to the World Series since 93. Obviously, the biggest storyline of them all pretty much is the Dodgers are going for their second World Series. So to close it out, two really good teams, but I think the Dodgers are going to win this series. And just like I've been confident all postseason that they're going to win again. And just like I've said all postseason, I think the reason they win the World Series is because of their starting pitching. And like I said, while I don't think they mow down the Blue Jays like they did the Brewers, I think it's going to be very similar in that we look up at the end of the series and the Blue Jays just were not able to do what they did in previous series. They're not able to string together these rallies against, Glasnow, Shohei, Yamamoto, definitely Snell and Yamamoto. Like, they're not able to do that. Not as many home runs, and then the Dodgers are able to put up runs against that pitching staff. But we'll see. It's gonna be a good series. Somebody in the Dodgers rotation is maybe due to not have as dominant as a start. So yeah, I got Dodgers in 6. I think it's the starting pitching is once again gonna be the reason why the Dodgers go on to win. So because of that, if I'm picking a World Series MVP, I'll go with Shohei because I think he'll have another game where he pitches really well. And I think that Game 4 against the Brewers really unlocked him. And like I said, the Blue Jays don't really have any lefties to neutralize him. I think there's a chance he goes off in this World Series. Maybe does something similar to what Freddie did last year. And, when you tie that in with him giving one good start at home against the Blue Jays, I think he's going to win World Series MVP. And but maybe a sleeper pick, I'd say, is Mookie Betts for him to have a really good series. Or maybe even someone like Blake Snell. Maybe he gets 2 starts and dominates. So it's going to be a fun series. I appreciate you guys listening. I hope I gave you guys a lot of good info on the Blue Jays, what makes them good, how do they match up against the Dodgers. And here we are, all the marbles on the table. The Dodgers are 4 wins away from going back-to-back. So it's going to be really fun. I should be back to recap the games. Probably won't be back to recap Game 1 individually. I probably will get on Sunday and recap what was the first 2 games. So Game 1 is Friday night. That is tomorrow at the time of this recording, which today is Thursday. Game 2 will be Saturday. Then it'll be games 3, 4, and 5 will be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then Friday and Saturday would be games 6 and 7 potentially. So let's go Dodgers. 4 wins away. I'll see you guys on Sunday to recap the first 2 games. And thank you guys so much for listening.